welcome to a chat between myself, Adrian Bell, and my colleague. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Andrew Prescott from the University of Glasgow.
And today we'd like to have a quick chat about some aspects of medieval revolt, and especially we want to compare them to modern revolt. So Andrew, my question for you is this a useful comparison to make with modern revolt?
I think it is very useful to think about studying the structure of revolts in just the same way as we might think about studying the structure of politics, the structure of economies, or the structure of warfare. In order to understand how revolts work, what sort of shape they have, it's very useful to draw comparisons with modern examples. For example, one could think of the Arab Spring in 2010, and the way in which revolts spread through different countries from comparatively minor incidents. An attack on a market cellar prompted an uprising in Tunisia, and the dynamics of the way in which that revolt works can actually tell us a lot about the dynamics of the way in which uprisings work at all periods of history. So I think that sort of comparative study is very, very useful. It's doubly useful because a lot of the kind of prejudice that many historians have about the nature of uprisings derives from 19th century psychological theories, which saw crowds as being something that was somehow subhuman and prone to manipulation by powerful leaders. We've started to understand from modern social psychology that actually the way in which crowds operate is much more complex than that, and it's not always as mad or as criminal as the 19th century theories suggested. So there's all sorts of ways in which thinking about modern revolts can be very helpful. And this was brought home to me when I gave my very first talk on the Peasants' Revolt on its 600th anniversary in 1981. And I gave a talk at Canterbury about the revolt. I was coming back on the train to London, following more or less the route that the medieval rebels had taken, although I was in a train, of course. And to my surprise, I saw flames burning, people rushing about as the train went through Brixton. And these were the Brixton riots of 1981, major uprising against the heavy-handed police attitude towards the Caribbean community at that stage, which really brought home to me the ways in which looking at modern riots can help shape our thinking and better understanding of medieval riots.
And I believe that you were a central role in the poll tax riots of 1990.
Hardly central, but obviously the comparison that a lot of people quickly draw between 1381 is with the riots against the government's imposition of a poll tax in the 1990s. And the major riots in 1991, there was a big demonstration in Trafalgar Square, and this helped eventually precipitate the fall of Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister. So that's a comparison people often make between 1381 and 1991. What was striking for me about that was the afternoon of the Trafalgar Square riots, I was actually in a pub somewhere in Bloomsbury, but not very far away, and having lunch with some friends. When I came out, was surprised to find that large parts of central London were in disarray. I've been totally unaware of that all afternoon. And actually, that does tell us something that's quite interesting about revolts, because they can, as it were, be patchy events. You can have major disturbances down the road and be completely unaware of them. And we know it was like that in 1381, that there could be riots in one village and peaceful proceedings in another. And particularly in urban contexts, it's sometimes very difficult to distinguish what was connected with the revolt and what wasn't. And there's a problem for us in trying to reconstruct events, because we have to look out for things that tell us that a particularly violent incident during the period of the revolt was connected with the revolt. If we've got a reference to an assault taking place at the time of the revolt, we can't be sure that was part of the revolt. It's not 100% certain. That was a problem they were actually even aware of in the Middle Ages. A judge called Bill Knapp, who was very important in proceedings against the rebels, actually made a comment in court at one point that even though an act of violence takes place at the time of the revolt, we can't be sure that it's connected with the revolt. So that was a lesson. I was there in 1991, but I wasn't aware it was happening. And that tells me a lot about the spatial way in which revolts operate.
I mean, that's hugely significant as well for historians and interpretation of evidence that obviously we've come aware of throughout the project. I suppose for this audience, though, Andrew, I was going to ask you a question about, I think, for this section, is there any point for us to refer to the poll tax linkage? You know, so it's very easy for us to, as you said, this is the one we look to, which is the most one we look for parallels. Do you think that is a link? In a sense, is there any sense around poll tax being a link?
I think what the poll tax riots in 1991 offer us as a parallel to what goes on in 1381 is how 1991 drew in lots of other discontent apart from the poll tax. It drew in concern about apartheid, concern about the attacks on trade unions by the Thatcher government. They were all kind of drawn into a wider demonstration. And that's what happens in 1381. It starts off as a protest against the poll tax, but actually the poll tax pretty rapidly disappears from sight, and it becomes a much wider, more generalised attack on government administration and government justice.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew.